$100 a minute.
I will say that he told that story when my mother had gone off, like, to go to the bathroom or something. Yeah. He's like, oh, look, now that your mother's gone, I'll tell you this one. Oh, it was hilarious. It was so much fun. All right. We're going to talk about my favorite topic today, immigration. Fashion. I love it.
Immigration.
We're live.
And we're going to do a little bit of a review in our discussion of immigration in the late 19th century. There are basically 4 waves of American immigration. Immigration has always kind of been going on in American history, but there's 4 really big waves of it. And we've already talked about 2 of them. We're going to talk about a 3rd today. The first was an immigration wave that happened during colonial times, from 1607 to 1789.
What are we talking about?
Immigration. Alright. Let's see. Let me get a new marker. Let's see if we can review what ethnicities, nationalities came to the colonies during the colonial time. Primarily who? What's the largest ethnic group that travels to the colonies? The English. Not British quite yet necessarily. The English. Who else? No. Not to the 13 colonies. Who immigrated? We did a whole thing on this. Who came to the 13 colonies? Scotch Irish. Very good. Scotch Irish. Who else? Oh, sorry? The Germans. Good. The Dutch. Good. That's the Dutch. The French Huguenots especially. French Protestants, called Huguenots. And one other major ethnic group that we are not talking about here? No. Africans. Obviously, they're a bit of a different case because they obviously came unwillingly, but come they did. And this was, and we don't have to go through the details, the English were kind of all over, but focused in New England, the Scotch-Irish in the back country, from Pennsylvania down south, the Germans in Pennsylvania, the Dutch and the French in New York and New Jersey, there was a smattering of Swedes, and this is the kind of group that kind of began mixing and mashing and melding together by the time independence rolled around and created this American nationality. Immigration to the United States from Europe pretty much is closed off, not closed off by any specific law, but shuts off in 1789. And from 1789 to 1815, there's very little immigration from Europe to the United States. Why? What's going on in Europe from 1789 to 1815? What? Whose wars? The French Revolution and... French Revolution and... Come on, didn't you study world history? Napoleon. From 1789 to 1815, Europe is fighting the wars of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. All of the young men who otherwise would have been possible immigrants were being sucked up into the armies to fight either for or against the French Revolution, either for or against Napoleon. And so for a quarter century, you have very little immigration to the United States. The United States doesn't really seem to mind because people in the United States, the first couple decades of the United States' existence, are having a lot of babies. Without any immigration from 1790 to 1800, the population doubled. The average American in 1800 was 14. What does that mean? There's a lot of babies. Benjamin Franklin was in England arguing the cause of kind of American autonomy before the Revolutionary War. And Franklin said, look, you have just dispatched to the colonies 3,000 troops. Every month in the colonies, 60,000 babies are born. What are your 3,000 troops going to be down the road? So American population growth is huge from just purely birth rates in the early decades of the country. Starting around 1825, when the Napoleonic Wars end, and then kind of people settle back into a normal, peaceful life, immigration picks up again, with a number of different ethnic groups coming to the United States, of whom were who? Who are we talking about here in this 1825 to 1865? Really, if you want it, 1835 to 1850 is the biggest part of this wave. Not yet. Who? The Irish. The Irish. Who else? Nope. The Germans. No. International slave trade ends 1808. Who else? Germans, Irish, English.
Hey, what happened?
No.
He was like, no.
No, he said there would be thieves.
And one group that we don't normally think of because they come from an entirely different part of the world.
Chinese.
Chinese.
Oh, okay. It must be the
That Chinese migration to the United States starts with the gold rush. And lots of Chinese, overwhelmingly male, come to California and then stick around. And one of the things they largely do is they build a lot of the railroads that start out in California and work their way back east. The Irish are unique in a lot of ways in this first early segment of American immigration. In what ways are the Irish different?
They had their own.
They're Catholics, which makes them a little unusual.
They had their own.
They're poor.
Heavy drinkers.
They like to drink, so do the Germans.
They're racist.
And so is everybody at that time. That doesn't make them any different.
Weren't they like working really, really cheap?
Where?
Anywhere.
Not anywhere. Cities. They're urban.
They didn't like them because they took them.
Right, they deal with more discrimination than other groups. They stay urban. All of these other groups, where do they go?
Towards the west.
Rural.
To do what? What do? They farm. They farm. That's the key. If you're a German immigrant in 1840, you are coming to the United States to farm. Land is very cheap. There's a lot of it. What is attracting you, what the pull factor of the United States is for you, is cheap land. No military, conscription, no tax, very low taxes, free land. Germans are like, where do we sign up? This is awesome. The Irish don't have as much money. The Irish sell everything they own just to get on a boat to escape starvation. They had no plans to come here otherwise.
The potato thing.
Potato famine. They don't have any money to buy even cheap land. They sometimes don't even have money to buy a train ticket somewhere else. So they stay right where they land. In East Coast industrializing cities, they form the backbone of, kind of market revolution, first industrial revolution factories in the East. This migration continues through the Civil War. That there are plenty of examples of ships arriving full of immigrants, and at the dock they are met with recruiters from the United States Army or the Confederate Army, and they said, hey, here's a $300 bounty, come on, join the Army. It's like, whoa, $300? Sign me up. And all these ethnic groups fought, in the war, which did a very important service, if you will, for American identity. The Civil War Americanizes and homogenizes these ethnic groups, that there's a lot less discrimination against the Irish after the Civil War than there was before it. And why do you think that is?
They gained respect.
Yeah, they gained respect. Exactly. That if I'm in, a non-Irish, if I'm in the 3rd New Jersey trying to hold this line against the Confederate assault, and right to my right is a brigade of Irishmen doing the same damn thing, that kind of leads, it leads to respect. It leads to this idea that any preconceived notions I might have had about them might be wrong. And you're going to see a lot less discrimination against the Irish after the Civil War, as you saw before it. Now, what historians call new immigration starts with the Second Industrial Revolution. And before we get to kind of the core of it, everyone's yelling, Italians, Italians! Before we get to the Italians, the Scandinavians, we need to give them a little bit of a mention here. People from Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark. They are the last ethnic group that comes to America to do what? Farm. Everyone after them is going to be urban dwellers. The Scandinavians are the last group to go farm. And do you remember from where did they go?
Michigan.
Cold places. Northern Michigan, North Dakota, Minnesota, northern Wisconsin. Where it reminds them of home. Basically, they're quiet, they're hardworking, they don't do anything to bother anybody, and they're in North Dakota, for God's sakes. They pretty much get left alone to eat their lutefisk, which is really disgusting, and do Norwegian farming things. If you ever find yourself in Minnesota or North Dakota, there is still a very strong Scandinavian accent up there. There's a lot of Lutheran. There are still counties there today that are majority Norwegian, majority Finnish, majority Swedish counties in the United States. We are a diverse country. A lot of ways. The quiet Scandinavians who just go to North Dakota and farm aside, when we talk about new immigration, we are talking about other groups. This is the largest wave of immigration in American history by percentage of people in the United States that came from somewhere outside the United States. Modern immigration, there are more individual people, but it's a much bigger country now than it was 120, 150 years ago. So in terms of percentage, this is the biggest one ever. Who is coming? The Italians.
Jews.
I was gonna say them.
The Poles, the Russians,
See, I said Russian. See, I told you.
Hungarians, Slavs, more Chinese, and even some Japanese.
Czechoslovakia. I said Slovens. That means whatever you want. Slavs.
Chinese and Japanese immigration gets restricted by law in the 1880s. Something called the Chinese Exclusion Act. And what do you think that is? You are excluding people coming from China. It's very simple to understand. Chinese Exclusion Act?
Why?
No one. Let's answer a real question. Why?
So many people.
Well, why would they exclude them and not other people?
Well, so let's see if we can answer that question. It's a great question. Why Chinese people? What?
No, no.
Go ahead, say it.
No, nothing.
Say it.
Right, say it.
No, what'd you say?
Done wrong.
Oh, Demi, come on.
You don't want to hear that.
I do. I bet I do. Can you whisper it in my ear?
That's YOLO.
Because YOLO.
We can chalk it up to very simple racism. They were too strange, too different, too not like Americans. It's not really much beyond that. Now, there are always, Irish especially, but blacks in the north do not want, they want to exclude, Irish and blacks especially, wish to exclude Chinese immigration because Chinese people are willing to do what? Work cheaper. You let new immigrants in, wages are going to go down. It's inescapable. People are willing to work for less. The group that I really want to focus on are these four, because the majority of this new wave immigration are of these four groups. We're going to talk about some characteristics. The Italians, the Jews, the Poles, the Russians. They do not speak English.
They don't understand freedom.
No experience in free countries. The Italians, the Jews, the Poles, the Russians. Italy was a kingdom ruled by kind of a king and an elite. The Jews, the Poles, and the Russians all come from the same place, by and large. They come from the Russian Empire. And the Russian Empire is famous for its authoritarianism. There is no Poland. Poland does not exist. Poland ceases to exist in 1795 and does not reappear on a map until 1918. It was gobbled up by Austria-Hungary, Russia, and Prussia. So there are still a lot of Poles. There's a Polish nation, but there is no Polish state for 130 years. Poland.
Like D.
They're either from Austria-Hungary, Prussia, or Russia. Most of them in Russia. Okay. Same with the Jew, yeah.
So like, okay, so you know how they disappeared? Okay, there's a layer, right?
Yes.
And that layer becomes another thing, right?
Yes.
And then that layer becomes another thing.
Yes.
Would you be that other thing or
Your nationality or your passport?
your nationality?
Your nationality doesn't change. The Poles are Poles. They speak Polish, they revere Polish history, they read Polish literature, they just don't live under a Polish government. They live under a Russian government, they don't particularly like it. Okay? The nation still exists, but there is no Polish state.
You guys sound the same.
Before 1918.
Oh, that's nice.
The Jews are the same. There is no Jewish state. There's a Jewish nation,
Yeah, why not?
but they live in Russia, Austria, Prussia, etc. So they have no experience in free countries. They are not. I just opened this. This is a stinky marker. They're non-Protestant, obviously. The Italians and the Poles are Catholics, the Jews are Jews, and the Russians are Orthodox. Yeah.
Didn't the Italians not want to stay there for long? Like, they were just going to stay there and like go back?
Well, some. About 30% of Italian immigrants did not end up staying in the United States. They went back, but that means 70% did.
It's 30. She said 25, it's 30.
25, 30. I mean, it's probably 29.13. You know what I mean? Like, not a big round number. It's slightly less than 1 in 3. Italians came to the United States, worked in the United States, made money in the United States, and then went back to Italy, where it's a lot cheaper to live. They live in ethnic neighborhoods. There's so many of them that they have no problem congregating together. This is where we get Little Italy. You know, the Lower East Side is where Jews live. Every ethnicity, you know, Peterstown and Elizabeth was home to whom? Italians. Beaverstown was an Italian neighborhood. What about this neighborhood?
Wait.
Hispanic?
Jews.
What?
Polish.
Polish. There you go. No.
Because they were.
Place where the Polish Bible.
From what I understand, the city of Elizabeth was bought. Polish place. Yeah, so if you want to learn the history, you want to see what happens to it, so this area used to be a Polish neighborhood that supported a thriving Polish community center. That I once Googled it to kind of figure out what the story with it was. Like, they used to have polka dances like every Saturday night at this place. And it was, yeah, at the Polish Hall. It was a thriving expression of Polish community in Elizabeth. And then when the Poles moved out of Elizabeth, it died.
Oh, that building.
Why did the Poles? So
Stand under it.
I want you to hold that thought for about 2 months. Because
Wait, what'd you ask?
Demi asked a great question. Where the hell did the Poles go? Well, the same place the Italians went.
Back home.
No. Where did the Poles and the Italians and the Irish go?
Up in Michigan.
Where did they go, Christopher?
The suburbs?
Yeah, they went to Union, Scotch Plains, Westfield, Summit, Roselle Park.
So this is Grand
After living in, so in the 1950s, all of these groups that we kind of put under the heading of white ethnics, the Irish, the Italians, the Jews, the Poles, left the cities and went and lived in the suburbs. We're going to talk about that when we talk about Block 8. But the question is, where did the Poles go? Scotch Plains is pretty much the short answer. Or Arizona, or California. They went to the suburbs. These ethnic neighborhoods were replaced, because there's still ethnic neighborhoods in Elizabeth. They're just not Irish, Polish, Italian neighborhoods anymore. Now there's Portuguese neighborhoods and Cuban neighborhoods and, there's Dominican neighborhoods. Exactly.
I hear the music all through the neighborhood.
I've told you before, before I die, I want to write an ethnic history of Elizabeth. Fascinating.
Have you started?
I have not. Maybe when my kids are. There is still a Hasidic community in the Hasidic Jewish community in Elizabeth, but there are very few non-Hasidic Jews in Elizabeth.
Hey, Mr.
Hasidic is the Jews that you can tell they wear big furry hats and they have long coats with tails.
You never saw around like North Bergen, there's like a town like
Yes, yeah, I know. I don't know, but I know what you're. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like Florida.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, there's Indian. Yeah, you're right. Flint, Detroit is Arabic. Or Flint, Michigan. Dearborn, very heavily Arab. In Michigan. Ethnic groups in cities congregate together. There are, Italian newspapers and Italian plays, and, Jewish kosher shops and Russian magazines, and this is how, you find yourself in a strange place. This is, what keeps you comfortable there. And many of you, I'm sure, are very well versed in how ethnic neighborhoods work and the difference between an ethnic neighborhood and the wider American world out there, and how it's easier a lot of times for an immigrant to stay, a first-generation immigrant to stay in that ethnic neighborhood. Their English might not be so good, or it's heavily accented. They feel that they're being judged when they go out into wider American society. The stuff that goes on with modern American, assimilation and integration and migration is the same stuff that always went Your parents, many of them live in ethnic neighborhoods. You won't, probably your children definitely won't. That's the story. That's how we do it. We've been doing it for a long time. We're pretty good at it. The Jews especially find economic success. All of your department stores, by and large, Bloomingdale's, Macy's, J.C. Penney's, are all Jewish founded. No, it's not a traditional department store. I'm talking about your old
Sears.
Sears. Sears is not. Sears is different. Sears is actually, Sears is born as a catalog store. Sears, it's interesting, just very briefly, Sears is a product, Sears is a product of the market revolution where farmers had money to spend. Farmers who lived in isolated areas had no way to get to a store, okay? What's the WC, or what was it? Whatever Sears is, Mr. Sears, whose first name I don't remember right now. Mr. Sears made his fortune in creating and producing a catalog that he would send to every farm family in America, and then you and the farm family would sit there and flip through the catalog and order things. That's how Sears began. That's how he made his fortune, by selling goods to these farmers that now didn't have the means to get to stores but had money to spend. That's different. A department.
Sears today.
No. The Sears catalog was discontinued maybe 15, 20 years ago. But even when I was a kid, I remember my mother got the Sears catalog. It was this enormous, thick catalog where you could pretty much order and have delivered to you anything under the sun. It was like Amazon without the computer. And that's what Sears was. A department store is something different. A department store is an urban phenomenon. A department store is, instead of going from one little store to the next little store to the next little store, the department store is kind of the precursor of your Walmart and your Target. It's a little classier. Like you've all been inside of a Macy's. Macy's carries lots of different stuff. That was invented pretty much by Eastern European Jews.
Catalogs, was it like pictures or was it like?
Pictures, yeah. Both. It had a picture. I mean, you guys have you ever gotten a catalog before Christmas? Yeah, that's what it was. Just this thick with everything. And the Sears catalog sold everything from teapots to tractors. You know, you could get your tractor through the Sears Roebuck catalog. I guarantee you, if you went on eBay and typed in Sears catalog, you would find old Sears catalogs for cheap. And it would be a very, very interesting thing to look at, you know, from a historical point of view. The movie studios, by and large, were founded by Jews. The Jews found a lot of economic success in the United States. But all of these groups did, by the second generation, these groups are well on their way to the middle class. And what you had by the second generation was middle class cities, which in a lot of ways is different from what happened to American cities. The middle class left the cities and went out to the suburbs. The last thing that I want to talk about is the reaction. By and large, now, there's a strong degree of social exclusion. Jews were not allowed into Ivy League universities until the 1960s, really. There was a tacit agreement that when Anthony Goldstein applied, he wouldn't get in. That Italians and Poles were not welcome at, fashionable places to eat and drink and stay. But there's not the same sort of overt discrimination as there was against the Irish. There's social exclusion, but not as much outright discrimination. The reaction to these groups came most kind of famously in the Ku Klux Klan. Now the Klan is an interesting outfit. The Ku Klux Klan, when we think of the Klan, we think of the Klan as a Southern-based terror group that doesn't like black people. And that's where the Klan started, and that's where the Klan ended up. But for about a 10-year period in the middle, in the 1920s, the Klan flowered. It was the golden age of the Klan, if you will. And they set themselves up as defenders of what they consider to be traditional American virtues. They set themselves up as defenders of Protestantism, defenders of virtue, anti-communist. They don't like Jews. They still don't like blacks. They don't like immigrants. They have this sense of the America that we are from is worth protecting. And especially in the Midwest, the Klan becomes very, very powerful for about 10 years. That a politician would be very concerned, does the Klan support me or not? What turned most Americans off from the Klan was the fact that the Klan is intimately wrapped up in violence. Most Americans, although they agreed maybe with what the Klan was saying, they didn't particularly like Catholics, and they didn't particularly like blacks, they didn't particularly like Jews, they certainly didn't like communists, but they also didn't like the violence that was associated with the Klan. And it was the violence that made people leave the Klan. And then the Klan kind of shrunk back to what it had been before, a Southern-based, anti-black terror organization. But the Klan is not powerful where these immigrants are. The Klan is powerful mostly all over the country, but mostly in the Midwest. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, places like that. What Americanizes these groups? If the Civil War did it for the Irish, World War II does it for these groups. These groups will Americanize during the Second World War, where pretty much during the Second World War, the government took every American citizen, except blacks, which were segregated, every American citizen into one giant pot, just spit them out into the army. So if you watch World War II movies, it's almost like a joke. Every World War II movie, in the platoon, there's like, the white Englishy guy from New England, and there's like the Jewish Italian guy from Brooklyn, and the white Southerner, and the California surfer guy, and the farm kid from Nebraska, and they all get thrown together, and they all have to work together and fight together to defeat the Nazis, and everybody at the end goes home happy. And it's kind of a joke, but there's a lot of truth in that. That World War II took Americans from all over the country and put them together for several years. And it definitely homogenized American culture in a lot of ways.
Have you seen a movie?
Have I seen what? I have not. I read the book. The book, I don't think it could beat the book. The book was incredible. Fun book. He just died. He was 99, I think. He died earlier this year. He died this year. What? He was old, 99. Yeah, it was a great book. Any other questions on immigration?